Ever find yourself wondering, like, what actually keeps those massive cargo ships, from turning into, like, floating traffic jams? Or even worse.
Yeah, yeah.
Today, we're diving into a world that's honestly way more interesting than it sounds. The IMO, the International Maritime Organization. Basically, they're like the rule makers, the referees for everything that happens out on the open ocean.
It's definitely more nuanced than that, but you've got the right idea. Just imagine for a second a world without the IMO. It'd be, well,
Oh, tell me, total chaos,
total chaos.
right?
We're talking oil tankers practically scraping against beaches, nobody agreeing on which navigation lights mean what. It would be, I don't know, like Mad Max, but with like container ships and luxury yachts.
Bad necks at sea. Okay, I
Yeah.
see the need for some rules. But when you say the IMO are rule makers, paint us a picture. What are we talking about here?
So they produce this whole, I guess you could say, sea of regulations. That's one way to think about it.
Regulations. Okay. Sounds a tad intimidating.
It can be. But there's a system to it, I promise.
Yeah.
At the very heart, you have these things called international conventions. These are like, think of them as the Constitution for the oceans. Every IMO member country, they all agree on these conventions. They cover the big things. I'm talking like safety, security, how to prevent pollution, all of that.
So those conventions, those are the like big overarching rules of the road.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's actually because of those conventions that we've seen incredible improvements. Like, did you know that the amount of oil spilled by tankers, it's dropped by over 90% since the 1970s?
Wow, 90%. That's a huge difference. So conventions set the stage, but what about the actual, nuts and bolts of making sure everyone follows them?
Right, so that's where codes come in. Think of these as more detailed technical instructions that all flow from those conventions. So, for example, you have this thing called the International Code for Ships operating in polar waters. We usually just call it the Polar Code.
Okay, makes sense. Different areas, different rules, especially as the Arctic opens up.
Exactly. With climate change and more ships going through those areas, the IMO realized, we need some serious environmental regulations up there to protect these fragile ecosystems.
Yeah, don't want a repeat of the Titanic, but in the Arctic. So we've got conventions, codes, but the IMO doesn't stop there, do they?
Oh, you're right. They've got a whole system. They also issue resolutions, circulars, guidelines, all sorts of things, really. It's their way of making sure everyone's on the same page, like a constant dialogue about making shipping safer, more efficient, all of that.
I'm starting to see what you meant by a sea of regulations. This is a lot. And I'm guessing most people listening, when they think about the IMO, if they've even heard of the IMO, probably don't think it affects their daily lives. But it does, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It touches their lives more than they realize, probably.
Yeah.
Think about something as simple as ordering a book online.
Okay.
Now, imagine you get that book and it's all messed up, like damaged during shipping. What happened? Well, the IMO has this thing called the Code of Safe Practice for cargo stowage and securing.
So how they pack the shipping containers, the ships themselves.
Exactly. That code, it's all about making sure your book
Yeah.
and millions of tons of other cargo, of course, all travel safely. Without it, who knows what kind of shape your stuff would arrive in?
Wow, I actually never thought about it like that, but it makes sense. All those delayed deliveries, suddenly they make a lot more sense.
Exactly. Or what about, I don't know, think about buying a kid's toy, right? Something simple.
Right.
The IMO, they have really strict regulations about dangerous materials, especially manufacturing. So that teddy bear you're buying, there's a good chance it's safer thanks to the IMO, whether you know it or not.
Okay, you've convinced me. These regulations, they're everywhere. But I'm guessing it's not all smooth sailing, is it?
You're right, there are definitely challenges. Enforcing these rules across the globe, I mean, we're talking about a huge undertaking. Like, for example, there's been a big push from the IMO lately to reduce sulfur emissions from ships.
Makes sense. Protect the planet.
Right. It's definitely a positive step for the environment. But at the same time, there's been a lot of, let's say, discussion around how easy these new fuels are to get, how much they cost. There are always different perspectives on how to put these regulations into practice.
Sure, like anything else, it's all a balancing act, right?
It is. And all this makes you think about what the future holds for the IMO, especially with all this talk about autonomous ships, self-sailing ships.
Oh, wow, yeah. Ships with no captains. I can't even imagine the kinds of rules they'll need for that.
Right. That's the big question. How is the IMO going to adapt? Are we going to be seeing international regulations for artificial intelligence? But on the high seas, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens.
That is a question to ponder. I have to admit, this has really been an eye-opening look at, well, a part of the world we don't often think about. It's amazing how these regulations, they might seem hidden away, like you said, beneath the surface, but they have a huge impact on all of us.
Absolutely. And for anyone who wants to, brave the waters themselves and learn more, all those IMO publications, they're all online. Just be prepared. It's a lot of information.
I bet. Like we've been saying, it's a whole sea of regulations out there. Thanks so much for joining us today. Until next time, keep those maritime questions coming.